We talk about the Absolute, we talk about Brahman, we talk about infinite consciousness, and they're all quite awe-inspiring terms. Which is fine in one way, but in another way it also tends to give a sense of remoteness, that somehow these are very lofty things, very far away from our everyday experience. In some ways it is very far from our everyday experience, but it's not far away from what's immediately going on. And we have access to the Absolute. We have access to Brahman. Because it's the essence of what's happening right now. It's closer than breathing, or closer than the jugular, as the Muslims might say. It's actually more persistent than the breathing, because it's always there. The breathing has gaps in it. It's always there, but it is very subtle. It's subtler than the breathing. It's so subtle and it's so familiar that we constantly overlook it. And yet we possibly stumble into it quite often. We possibly stumble into it without realizing what it is. Which is where words like Absolute, Brahman and Infinite Consciousness have their value. Because what we might write off as nothing of any consequence, as being just little old me, boring old me, what we're actually writing off is something really quite miraculous. And it's there in your awareness. It's there in your sense of being. And in a way, we could say that the Yoga Vasistha is a course in awareness appreciation. It's getting us to turn our attention to this awareness and then to appreciate what it is that we're actually being aware of. And in doing so it can seem quite complicated or quite convoluted. And this is only because we're trying to put it into words. But it is so simple, so very simple. And it's so simple that we overlook it, we constantly overlook it. It isn't hard to find, but it is hard to acknowledge. And it's hard to talk about. And the thing is, once we have stumbled upon it, once we have got some inclination of what's going on, then it's difficult to stay with that. Then when we start getting caught up with things, maybe you hear the doorbell or baby crying in the next room, or there's things to be gotten on with, and the moment's passed and you've forgotten what you were about, or what you discovered, or what you'd fallen into, or what you'd stumbled on. And the whole sort of run of events, the whole cycle of events just sucks us in once again. So we've been hearing about King Janaka, who stumbled upon this revelation. It fell in his lap, as they say. And this story was told to illustrate this point, that it can happen instantly. The traditional way of understanding this is that you need to follow a path to get this realization. but you don't. There's no path to it. There's no path to it. You stumble upon it, you get it, and then you either appreciate it and then take steps to reinforce it, to keep coming back to it, or you just forget about it and move on as if nothing has happened. So although this story was supposed to illustrate how immediate this realization can be, how it can happen without any effort, we're still being taught, there's still quite a lot of emphasis being put on the need to deal with the tendencies which take us away from this realization. Vasishta continued, O Ram, thus do inquire into the nature of the self, even as Janaka did. And this inquiry is about turning the attention onto itself. It's being aware of our awareness. Then you will reach, without any obstacle whatsoever, that realm of the knowers of what is to be known. This is it. This is what there is to be known. There is nothing beyond this. There is nothing beyond this awareness. You might wonder how I can say that. But once you've stumbled upon it, once you start appreciating its nature, you realize that this is what everything arises within. And there isn't anything, that this is it. This is like space. It's like saying what's beyond space. Well, there is something beyond space. It's consciousness. But there's nothing beyond this. You realize this. Again and again. Again and again. One should overcome the enemies known as the senses. The senses are what direct us away from awareness of our awareness. Again and again, one should overcome the enemies known as the senses, and then the self attains self-satisfaction by its own endeavour. When thus the infinite self is realized, sorrow comes to an end. Even the seeds of delusion are destroyed. The shower of misfortune ceases, and the perception of evil ends. Hence, O Ram, be like Janaka, and realize the self in the inner light. Be an excellent person. It's the greatest of endeavours. We're realizing the potential of our existence, of who we are. So realize the self in the inner light. This is basically another way of just saying be aware of your own awareness. If one engages oneself in constant self-enquiry and sees the ever-changing nature of the world, in due time one will attain self-knowledge like Janaka. Janaka was secure in his self-knowledge. He was imperturbable in it. Self-knowledge is something that can be realized in an instant, but we can also lose it in an instant. We can be drawn from it in an instant. And this is why it has to be constant self-enquiry. You engage yourself in constant self-enquiry, and you see the ever-changing nature of the world. You see that there's nothing in the world which is fixed, nothing which will provide us with ultimate satisfaction. So eventually our self-knowledge will become more imperturbable, like Janaka's. Neither God, nor rites and rituals, or any action, nor wealth, nor relatives are of any use in this. To those who are afraid of the world illusion, self-effort as self-enquiry alone is capable of bringing about self-knowledge.